From broken to beautiful. A story of faith and transformation. Welcome back to my channel. I'm so grateful you're here today. If this is your first time watching, this is where we dive deep into faith, hope, and the incredible ways God transforms our lives. Today I want to share Sarah's story with you, a powerful testimony that reminds us that no matter what we're facing right now, God has a plan for our lives that's bigger than our pain. Sarah's journey from brokenness to beauty perfectly illustrates the ancient wisdom found in Ecclesiastes 3:1-8, which tells us that to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. Sarah's story shows us how God works through every season of our lives, even the painful ones, to bring about His perfect plan. So grab your favorite cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and please watch until the end. I promise you'll walk away with hope, encouragement, and maybe even a new perspective on your own journey. Let's dive into Sarah's incredible transformation. 3 years ago, Sarah's life looked perfect from the outside. She had a successful marketing career, a beautiful apartment in the city, and what everyone called the perfect relationship. At 28, she was ambitious and thought she had it all figured out. But perfection, as she would learn, is often just a carefully constructed facade. It started with small cracks. David, her of 2 years, began working late more frequently. Their conversations became shorter, more distant. Sarah told herself it was just stress from his new promotion, but deep down, she knew something was shifting. The wedding they'd been planning for months suddenly felt like a distant dream they were both too afraid to acknowledge. Then came the night that shattered everything Sarah thought she knew about her life. She remembers it was a Tuesday evening in October. She had prepared his favorite dinner, lit candles, and was ready to talk about the wedding venue they'd visited that weekend. Instead, David sat across from her and said 5 words that changed everything. "I can't do this anymore." The engagement was off. But that wasn't the worst part. Over the next hour, Sarah discovered that not only was he leaving her, but he'd been seeing someone else for months. The woman she'd suspected but convinced herself she was being paranoid about. The woman who was now carrying his child. Sarah felt like the ground had been pulled from under her feet. Everything she'd built her identity on, being the perfect girlfriend, the future wife, the woman who had it all together, crumbled in an instant. Like Job in the Old Testament, who lost everything he held dear. Sarah was about to enter her own season of testing that would ultimately reveal God's greater plan for her life. The months that followed were the darkest of Sarah's life. She threw herself into work, trying to numb the pain with productivity and achievements. She'd wake up at 5 a.m., work until 10 p.m., and collapse into bed, hoping exhaustion would silence the voices in her head telling her she wasn't enough. Her friends tried to help, but Sarah pushed them away. She was embarrassed, ashamed, and convinced that everyone was looking at her with pity. The woman who had it all together was now the woman who could uneven keep her man interested. Sarah stopped going to church. How could she face God when she felt like such a failure? How could she sing worship songs when her heart felt completely empty? She'd grown up in faith, but in that season, it felt like God had abandoned her, just like David had. The anxiety attacks started in December. Sarah would be in the middle of a meeting and suddenly she couldn't breathe. Her heart would race, her palms would sweat. She'd have to excuse herself to the bathroom where she'd sit on the floor, trying to remember how to take a normal breath. She felt broken. It's not just hurt or disappointed, but fundamentally broken, like something essential inside her had been permanently damaged. Sarah was living out what the wise King Solomon described in Ecclesiastes 3-4. This was her time to mourn. Though she couldn't yet see that her time to dance was being prepared by God's loving hands. It was during one of these panic attacks, alone in her apartment on a cold January night, that Sarah heard it. Not an audible voice, but a whisper in her spirit that said, "You are not broken. You are being rebuilt." Sarah dismissed it at first. It was probably just her mind playing tricks on her. But the whisper came again, stronger this time, with a peace that she hadn't felt in months. That night, for the first time in months, Sarah picked up her Bible. It fell open to Isaiah 43:18-19. "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. Sarah broke down crying. Not the desperate, hopeless tears she'd become accustomed to, but tears of something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. She remembered the ancient words of Psalm 32:5. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Perhaps her long night of weeping was finally giving way to dawn. The next morning, Sarah called her friend Rachel, who'd been patiently checking on her despite her consistent rejections of invitations. I think I'm ready to try again, Sarah told her through tears. I think I'm ready to trust God with this mess. Part 2. The Journey Back to Faith. Rachel didn't just invite me back to church. She invited me into her small group, a circle of women who met every Thursday to study God's Word and share their lives authentically. I was terrified. What if they judged me? What if they saw right through my broken places? But when I walked into that living room for the first time, I was met with the most genuine warmth I'd experienced in months. These women didn't have perfect lives. They had real struggles, real pain, and real faith that had been tested by fire. Maria, a single mom of 2, shared about her journey through divorce and how God had provided for her family in miraculous ways. Jennifer talked about her struggle with infertility and how it had deepened her relationship with God. Lisa opened up about her battle with depression and how her faith had become her anchor. For the first time since my world fell apart, I didn't feel alone. We were studying the book of Ruth, and as we dove into her story, I began to see parallels I'd never noticed before. Ruth lost everything: her husband, her homeland, her security. But she chose to trust God and follow Naomi into an uncertain future. And God had a plan for her that was more beautiful than anything she'd lost. Your people will be my people, and your God my God, Ruth had said. That night I made a similar declaration. I was done trying to figure out my life on my own. I was done believing that my worth was tied to my relationship status or my professional achievements. I was ready to let God be my God, completely and without reservation. As I began to surrender my broken pieces to God, something miraculous started happening. The anxiety attacks became less frequent. The sleepless nights turned into peaceful rest. Most importantly, I began to see myself the way God saw me. Not as damaged goods, but as his beloved daughter. I started serving at church, helping with the children's ministry. There's something about the pure, uncomplicated faith of children that began to heal parts of my heart I didn't even know were wounded. Their joy was infectious, their trust in God's goodness complete. One Sunday, a little girl named Emma drew me a picture. It was a stick figure with a huge smile, standing under a rainbow. At the bottom, in her careful 7-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "Miss Sarah is happy because God loves her." I kept that picture on my bathroom mirror for months. Every morning, it reminded me that my identity wasn't found in my circumstances, but in God's unchanging love for me. 6 months into my healing journey, Rachel invited me to a community outreach event. We were serving meals to families in need, and I honestly wasn't sure I was ready for something so public. But I went, trusting that God would use even my nervousness for good. That's where I met Marcus. He wasn't volunteering. He was there with his 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Yes, the same Emma who'd drawn me the picture. They'd been coming to the food pantry for months after Marcus had lost his job due to company downsizing. What struck me wasn't just his humility in accepting help, but the way he cared for Emma. Despite their difficult circumstances, he was patient, loving, and somehow maintained hope. When Emma ran up to me excitedly, calling me Miss Sarah from church, Marcus's face lit up with genuine warmth. "You're the one who's been brightening my daughter's Sundays," he said with a smile that made my heart skip. "She talks about you all the time." We began talking, and I discovered that Marcus was a single father who'd been raising Emma alone since her mother passed away from cancer 3 years earlier. He'd been a graphic designer but had been struggling to find stable work. Despite his challenges, his faith was unshakable. "God has never let us down," he told me simply. Even when I couldn't see his plan, he was always providing. Marcus and I began spending time together, first as friends, then as something deeper. But this relationship felt completely different from what I'd experienced with David. It was built on a foundation of faith, mutual respect, and genuine care for each other's hearts. Marcus saw my scars and didn't run, celebrated my healing without trying to rush the process. Most importantly, he loved God more than he loved me, which somehow made me feel more secure, not less. Our first official date was at a coffee shop after church. Emma came with us, coloring quietly while we talked for hours about our dreams, our fears, and our hopes for the future. It felt like family from the very beginning. 8 months later, Marcus proposed, not with a grand gesture or expensive ring, but with a simple, heartfelt speech about how God had brought us together in his perfect timing. Emma had helped him pick out the ring, a simple, beautiful band that represented the new beginning God had given us both. Part 3. The wedding of my dreams. Our wedding day was everything I'd never known I wanted. It wasn't the elaborate affair I'd planned with David. Instead, it was intimate, meaningful, and centered on our faith. We wrote our own vows, promising to love each other as Christ loved the church, to support each other's relationship with God, and to build a home where faith, hope, and love would flourish. Emma was our flower girl, and as she walked down the aisle scattering petals, I couldn't help but think about how God had used this precious little girl to bring healing to my heart and love to my life. In my vows, I shared how God had taken the broken pieces of my life and created something more beautiful than I could have imagined. Marcus's vows spoke of how God had used our individual pain to prepare us for the joy of being together. As we exchanged rings, I remembered Isaiah 61:3, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. Today, 2 years into our marriage, our life together is more beautiful than I ever dreamed possible. We've started a ministry for single parents at our church, helping others navigate the challenges of raising children alone while maintaining faith. Marcus has launched a successful freelance business, and I've transitioned into nonprofit work, using my marketing skills to help faith-based organizations reach more people. But the most beautiful part of our story is how God has used our individual journeys to create something that brings him glory. Emma now has the stable, loving home she deserves. Marcus has a partner who supports his dreams and shares his faith. And I've learned that my worth isn't determined by my relationship status, but by my identity as God's beloved daughter. We re-expecting our first child together, a baby boy who will grow up knowing that his family was built on faith, hope, and the miraculous way God can turn our mess into his message. The lessons learned looking back on this journey, I want to share 3 key lessons that I hope will encourage you in whatever season you're refacing. First, God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't feel like it. I spent months angry at God for allowing my engagement to end, not realizing that he was protecting me from a marriage that would have been built on shaky ground. What felt like rejection was actually redirection toward something better. Second, your brokenness is not your identity. I allowed my failed relationship to define my worth for far too long. But God sees us as his beloved children, regardless of our circumstances. Our value comes from him, not from our achievements or relationships. Third, God wastes nothing. Every tear I cried, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, God has used all of it to deepen my faith, increase my compassion, and prepare me for the life he had planned. Your pain has purpose, even when you can't see it. A message of hope. If you're in a season of brokenness right now, please hear this. You are not alone, and this is not the end of your story. God is working behind the scenes, preparing something beautiful for your life. Trust his process even when it's painful. Maybe you're going through a breakup, dealing with infertility, facing financial struggles, or battling depression. Whatever your wilderness looks like, God hasn't forgotten you. He's making a way where there seems to be no way. Your story matters. Your pain has purpose. And the God who created you has a plan for your life that's more beautiful than anything you've lost. Keep believing, keep trusting, keep hoping. Your breakthrough is coming. Thank you for watching. If this story encouraged you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, you are never alone in your journey.